Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Kageyama, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to Be Your Own Hero. Uh, my name is Mark Kageyama, and I'm a stage 4 prostate, bone, and lung cancer patient. Been battling cancer for over 2 years now and doing very well. And no real health updates. Things are going really well. Uh, Other than that, it's been a rainy day here in Southern California. It's a Sunday, which we need the rain desperately. And so we're very, very thankful to get it. And I hit a big milestone today on LinkedIn. I hit 9,000 followers, which I'm so thankful for. And I thank all of my LinkedIn followers and everybody who's helped me along the way. And going back, I was in my room for a long period of time back in the spring of 2021. And LinkedIn was my connection to the world. And so I wasn't able to walk very well. And so I was stuck in my room for months, 3 months. And so LinkedIn really helped me. People always said, oh, social media has it's this and this and negative this and negative that. And I didn't find that. Sure, you get your lone examples and things like that of, negative stuff, but it's so small as far as I'm concerned on LinkedIn, and the great benefits that I've received on LinkedIn have just been countless. And I'm so thankful for all the followers and all the people. And I've met so many people that I consider to be my friends. And so I thank every single person, including Amber, who is my guest today. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce my guest in a couple minutes, uh, Amber Hollowell, and she's from North Carolina, where my great friend Katie Gaspari Rudolph is from, my co-host and founder of Cancer Conquering Community on Clubhouse. And so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Katie. And she's always putting out great content on LinkedIn. So I suggest she's under Katie R now. She just got married. So congratulations once again to her and her husband, Michael. So at this time, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Amber Hollowell. Amber, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Amber Hollowell, and I have not got nearly the following that you do on LinkedIn. Honestly, I've been on LinkedIn for probably over a decade and never really did a lot with it. It was something that when I was in school, I needed to, and I left it there. And then in the last few months, I kind of dived back in a little bit. And so probably in the last month or two, it kind of ramped up, and I've gotten to where I'm posting things more often and really starting to connect with different people in the health community or in advocacy, which is what I'm into. Awesome. To go into that, I was a nursing student and kind of changed gears at the last minute and decided I'd go into health advocacy instead so that I could help more people at a time rather than one-on-one care. I saw a lot of problems within the healthcare system, and that's what I wanted to I wanted to be the bridge to gap those two so that we actually go back to treating patients as people and honestly not as a number.
So what intrigued me about you, Amber, is your experience with your father who had cancer, and you also had cancer as well, but let's focus mostly on your father, because that's an extraordinary story, and it's a story that I think people need to hear. And this is a kind of a follow-up in a way to my interviews with Lori Lemasters, who's a caregiving expert. And this is, you've had totally different experiences, which make it so interesting for everyone. So why don't we start with your father, Amber?
All right. In April of 2015, I was in nursing school at a private school here in North Carolina. And so my family had contacted me and said, "We need to see you. When did your semester end?" And I had exams until May 12th. And so the day after my exam, I was supposed to go 2 hours to go visit my sister. And I called my mother because this was odd. I finished nursing school. I wanted a break, like a day off, let me sleep in it. I didn't want to drive 2 hours. So I called my mother, and over the course of the conversation, figured out it wasn't she that was sick. It wasn't my sister that was sick. So that only left my dad. So that's when my sister told me that he had been diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. They were going to Duke then. Most of his medical care was through the Department of Veteran Affairs, VA. So here in North Carolina, the main hub is in Durham. And for oncology, for people who are in Eastern North Carolina, you have to drive to Durham to get care. So when they discovered his tumor, it was bad enough on his scalp and large enough that they decided that Duke needed to come in and partner with them so that they could go ahead and get the surgery done as quick as possible. So when I jumped in, it was meeting the surgeon. So May 15th, I think, is when we met the surgeon at Duke. And he felt like they had done a PET scan 2 weeks before. My dad had 2 lymph nodes infected of 11 in a chain down the side of his neck. And his primary melanoma was on the top of his head. And so they were like, "We're going to go in and take the tumor off, and then we'll take that lymphatic chain. And then we'll move from there." And so the day of surgery, they come in, they're still confident they can get it. And after surgery, they come out, and the surgeon won't look at my sister and I in the eye. He kept looking at the floor and just finally swallowed and said, "It's not, if it comes back, it's when." And by the time, it had only been 2 weeks since that, or 3 weeks, I think, by the PET scan, by the time he had surgery. And he knew 9 of the lymph nodes were infected because they fell apart in his hand as he removed them. They were blocked. And my dad wound up having probably about a 3 by 5 inch section of his scalp removed. And the tumor was not embedded in the skull. It wasn't in the bone. It was all surface level, but it was large. And so they had to do a large skin graft on his left thigh to cover the top of that. And he wound up having like an incision that had 38 staples down the side of his neck. And as soon as he came out, he went down to a stage 3, but his white blood count within a few hours doubled. And they knew that put him automatically back in stage 4. Well, because he's working with the VA for any kind of chemotherapy or immunotherapy, which is what we decided to do, they had to get further approval, but you had to wait for the paperwork to finish from the first one that they thought he was stage 3 on to finish and be approved, and then say, "Nope, we don't need it," before they could cancel it out, before you could submit the next. So there was a lot of red tape. So by the time my dad comes home, my dad was.
So let me pause you a second there. Let's back up a little bit and talk about your relationship with your dad up to that point.
Okay. At that point in time, I was 37, and my father and my parents were married until I was 12, going on 13. And then we went and would spend a week with my mother and then a week with my father. Within a year, my dad had met another woman and decided to get married a second time. And I didn't really trust her. And that relationship got very rocky very quickly. And part of that, I figured out as an adult, was that she wanted to put a wedge between my sister and I, because then you didn't have to pay child support. So long story short, my sister stayed with my dad. I stayed with my mother. And we really didn't talk. My dad packed up my bed and all of my belongings and put them in a barn that same weekend. And I didn't really feel like I had a place to go back to. By 17, so about 3.5 years after that, we started seeing each other at Christmas or Thanksgiving, and we would say the general, "Hey, how are you doing?" And we would speak. But I called my father daddy growing up, and he became dad at that point. And that was my term for him, dad. There wasn't that deep connection anymore that had been severed. And so over the years, he did have a bond with my kids. I kept that very open. I wanted him to have that bond with them. But my dad turned into a hoarder, and there wasn't a place for us to go back and visit. So most of the time, those visits, once the kids went to school, became on holidays, summer weekends. If we went down, Christmas, birthday parties, for the kids, he might would come to those. But again, we lived about 2.5 hours apart, so we didn't see each other as much. And my dad wasn't one for the phone. So when I came back into his life with this, it pretty much was from the nursing aspect. My sister is, smart, but she knew she wasn't medically minded. And so she wanted me there, and my opinion there, to kind of take my dad through the system. And his sister had already gotten him lined up with the VA and gotten that improved and lined up the surgeon. So all of that was in place. So I pretty much just picked up where they had left off and became his primary caretaker. My father was, by that time, he and my stepmother were no longer married, had not been married for many years. So my dad had surgery, came home, and pretty much, so when he goes back to surgery, he's kind of like, "Oh, I get to get spoiled. You're going to bring me ice cream, and I get to sit back and watch TV." And I was like, "No, you're going to be walking the halls. You're going to do what they tell you to do. You're going to be drinking your fluids," which my dad lived off the land. He had his own chickens and his own eggs. He had a huge garden. And everything was natural for him anyway. So he's very healthy. So this was kind of different for him. Going from somebody who never went to the hospital my entire life. My dad had allergies, so he might get a sinus infection. But my dad never went to the hospital for care, not even to the ER. I think he went for one ER trip when I was a teenager that I heard about. That was it. Perfect health, other than when this cancer was found. So because I had been in nursing school, I already knew, and we had just covered tumors and the staging of tumors. I knew that my dad with melanoma at a stage 4 was probably only going to live 3 to 9 months, maybe a year. At the same time, my sister had gotten divorced and was moving in with him as well. And because my dad was a hoarder, we couldn't let him come home immediately. He went to his siblings and stayed with my aunts.
Okay,
so
Amber, can you explain the hoarding part so that people can kind of picture that part as well?
My dad had hoarded our family home to the point where it was unlivable, and he had pretty much abandoned it. And part of that goes back to my dad being the way that he was, which was he compartmentalized everything. Later, I realized, and when he was young, this wasn't something. In fact, when I was young, this wasn't even something that people discussed or knew about. But my dad was neurodivergent, and that makes it harder for him to process things. It makes him harder for him to talk about things, express his emotions, or even being able to deal with his emotions. So instead, my dad had a lot of heartache. His real mother had passed when he was 5 years old. And I think that kind of started it. And so you add my mother's divorce, and he felt like that was a betrayal. And then with me, he felt when I said, "I don't want to go down there anymore. I'm going to live with mom." He took that as another betrayal. Packing up my things wasn't saying, "I don't want you here." I understand that now. But then I didn't. But really what it was is he couldn't deal with it. He didn't know what to say. It was hurtful. I'm sure it made him angry as well, but he didn't know how to deal with it. So I think, like everything else in my life, my dad just hoarded it, and he packed it up and stuck it away.
Give us a picture of that, of what you mean by hoarding.
Okay, so the house that when I took over his care, and he went in the hospital, he went and stayed with my aunts. So when we get back, this is kind of the first time I'm being able to get into the house. And my dad, because he was kind of the local handyman, kept everything. So if it was spare doors, spare shutters, spare faucets, whatever he had done at this other house, leftover paint, leftover nails, if it had value and could be used again, he kept it. And so in his house, instead of having a bed that he could go sleep in, it was covered in work clothes, like stacks of them and stacks of them, more than he possibly ever could need. But if he had been given it, he didn't get rid of it. Another bedroom was literally on the floor. There were lampshades of different sizes and colors, cords, electrical cords of different sizes and colors. And then my dad would keep mason jars, and all those nails were in different mason jars and labeled with Sharpies what size they were, the whole 9 yards. And this, so when you walked into the house, by the time I got into the picture, everything was just, my dad's eyesight was gone. He had macular degeneration. And I think that may have been a little bit of it, why it got so extensive. But when we got in there, there was a path from the back door was kind of, or actually the back of the house was a screened-in porch that had actually been closed in, and about like a sunroom on one full wall. And so that door, when you walked in, you could walk straight across the room to the sofa, and that couch only had one space clear. Like the other seats, you couldn't sat on the couch beside him. And then when you went back, traced your steps back to this door, you could then go to the bathroom and get to the sink and to the stove and to the fridge.
Wow.
And that was it. And everything was stacked: containers, newspapers, boxes, clothes. It was stacked 5-6 feet in the air, the entire room, every room. And so I couldn't let him come home to that. So we had to get rid of things. And this did not make him happy. He stayed with one sister who lived about 30 minutes away, which was very safe. The other sister lived a quarter mile down the road. And they caught him on more than one occasion trying to go out and get their bike and ride it down to the house to see what we were up to. That we were cleaning out the house because we were getting rid of his stuff, and he wanted his stuff. And when you talk about a hoarder, they have a lot. There's a lot of emotion wrapped up in all those things that they are keeping, because they haven't dealt with them. So we're just tossing things, and I wouldn't say tossing, but yeah, there was a lot of stuff. We took off cart after cart after cart of stuff to the dump, clearing out that house so that it was livable. I wanted him to have a home. I didn't want him walking in that house was mental anguish. Like everywhere you looked was just heartache and despair. And I wouldn't say giving up, but he had really closed off. So when he finally was able to come back in the house, because we've gotten the trash out, we still have lots of things we need to sort and figure out what to keep and what to get rid of. But we've cleaned everything, scrubbed everything, so that I feel safe enough that he can come in with this massive incision while he's healing and it not affect his health. So we bring him back about 2 weeks later, and he just walks around the house and he won't say a word. Clenching his jaw, turning like the face just red. And my dad, I do it too. But we have like a couple of veins here near our jawline that will just throb when we get angry and just going nuts. And he's just like, "What'd you do with this?" "It's in the barn, Dad." "What'd you do with this?" "It's in the garage, Dad." And that would pacify him a little bit. And then he'd go out in the garage and check for it. "Where's it at? Where's it at?" And everything that we got rid of, he was not happy about. So through that process, my dad, we grew up watching This Old House. And my dad, again, was a handyman. So he taught my sister and I a lot of things growing up already. So coming home from the hospital, and after that 2 weeks, his incision was pretty much healed. He just needed to stay out of the sun. He had to wear a hat to keep that top part protected. And he really had to keep that skin graft. Skin graft, like he couldn't even wear his boxers over it. His boxers would create little tears in the top of it. His shorts would create tears in it. So he would walk around with his shorts rolled up on that one leg and pinned so it wouldn't scratch into that skin graft. but he couldn't get in the floor and peel up carpet like we were doing. He couldn't take up the carpet boards. He couldn't take up. So there were certain things that we got into that you could tell he wanted to be active, and he would kind of come in there and watch what we were doing and check everything out because he very much wanted to be a part of it, wanted to share in it. And I'm very happy. I have a couple of videos, and they're very blurry, and they're only like maybe 30, 45 seconds, but I have a couple of videos where he's like doing stuff like in the floor, or showing my nephew how to lay board in the floor, the baseboard down over the top of my sister's room that we were working on at the moment. And I'm glad that I have those. I think about 20 years ago, we did not have iPhones and have instant memories that we could make. And I'm so thankful that I had those. So I made a lot of, I guess, progress notes. So we'd be like, this old house, stage 1, this old house, stage 2, because we really were. We redid every room in that house so that he had a home instead of, geez, what I would have called a garbage dump, which was heartbreaking because that was my great grandparents' home. And I didn't want to see, I was not happy that my dad had made it that either. But at the same time, I knew that was kind of a symptom of something bigger for him.
So at what point did dad become daddy again for you? How long a period of time?
Well, he came from the hospital. That was like at the end of May. And then we really didn't do anything for treatments for about 10 weeks. And then my dad started, all of a sudden, everything that seemed to have been going well. His health was great. He didn't have any issues. And my dad was kind of going scruffy, letting the beard grow, and he shaved. And within a day or two, I noticed that along that inflammation, that line of scar tissue that he had from the initial surgery, it started to swell. And within a day, he had a tumor. Within 2 days, he had 3 tumors. Within 5 days, he had 8 tumors. In 7 days, my dad had grown 14 tumors. And they filled from the side of his neck out to his shoulder, puffed out. And they ranged from the size of a pea to the size of an egg. And I had called his doctor and was like, look, we have got to get on top of it. If y'all are going to do immunotherapy, we need to crank it because I've just watched tumors blowing up on him. It's ramping. We've got to do something. And I could tell my dad was scared. And my dad wasn't scared of anything, but he just got real quiet. And whenever my dad got kind of quiet, you knew he was kind of contemplating or thinking about something. But because I was down there every day of this, I would drive 2 hours down, I'd be there when my sister would leave for work at 8 o'clock. And then I would stay until she got home, and sometimes until 8, 9 o'clock, depending on if we were still painting or whatever we were doing. I was there till 10 o'clock at night, and then would drive home again. So during that time,
that was every day. You had a 2 hour
every day.
So 4 hour round trip?
Yep. Every day.
Wow.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So, and when we went to the VA, if we were going to Durham, it was a 3-hour trip. So, so when that happened, she wanted to get him in. So we got him in, and I could tell she was like, we're going to start the immunotherapy. We're going to do some more scans and see what's going on. And by then, what had only been in his neck and on his head now was in his 5th through 9th ribs. It was highlighting in his collarbone. He had, it was in his femur. It was in his pelvis. He had spots in his lungs. He had spots in the abdominal lymph nodes. And I think maybe at that time he had a spot on the outside of his liver. So she knew that I was right. We needed to move if we were going to give him any time. And his birthday was August 19th. So we were already kind of pushing this, like we've barely done 3 months. Like, come on, let's get going. But the VA is a lot of red tape. So my dad, at the same time that we're working on cleaning the house, because I was distant and now I'm not, my sister and I aren't the closest of people. We kind of can't live in the same county. We have to have some distance. And And so we weren't, so we were close. Like we would call, we would text, we'd email, like, you know, we went on family vacations together, but I didn't go down there all the time because we did sometimes rub each other the wrong way. So me coming home and being there to work in the house all day up until 6 o'clock at night, and then she would come home, she started to see our relationship change. And the more my dad opened up to me, the angrier my sister got. And that kind of opened the door that summer, that late summer, for him to start talking about what had happened in those years when I was a teenager where we weren't speaking. But he did have my sister. So we started talking about some of the things about, you know, things with her anger, and that kind of just opened the door to him being able to talk to me about the thing that we had never confronted, about those conversations when I was a teen, when he said I had betrayed him and didn't want to live with him anymore. Or the fact that I didn't like my ex stepmother, that I didn't trust her. You know, we kind of openly forgave each other for those things, but it gave him space to be able. I do this with my kids. You have to have a round table, and ours is the kitchen table. And when you come to the round table, you can cry, you can scream, you can vent, you can yell, you can bang your fist. It is a safe space. There is no wrong emotion. And I wanted my dad to purge all that mental stuff he'd been hiding in his head that led to the hoarding. I wanted him to be able to get rid of that because I didn't want my dad to die with that. I wanted him
So,
to be able to leave this world
from the
lighter.
time that you started going there to be with him, what time period are we talking about? How
Um,
long? How long a period of time?
that was May, from May 28th until probably September 20th, 22nd, somewhere around there. Because my birthday's the 22nd, and we came up here to he had a VA appointment that day. And so that's why it sticks out. But he was starting to get wobbly with his walk, and pain was starting to become a problem at that point in time. It was more the medications that he was having to take were giving him, honestly, constipation, and that was giving him, and the chemo, just everything dried him out, no matter how much fluid he put in there. And it didn't matter how many stool softeners, everything else we were doing. Like my aunt had a fig tree. My dad ate raw, like fresh figs, 13, 14, 15 a day, and was still
Wow.
having these issues with clogging up because he was beginning to start taking some pain meds. So when that started up, I just went ahead and moved down there and was there from then on until, honestly, until he passed. Because he needed me to be. My
Mm-hmm.
sister, because he was starting to get wobbly, we didn't necessarily, and his eyesight again was not good. And his glasses, my dad always had to have a lot of adjustments with his glasses. And bless his heart, we had him, the VA was working him in to get his eyes checked and to update his glasses. And he got them, he was able to wear them for a week. And then his just the pressure in the neck would just cause so much headaches that he just stopped reading. Like my dad liked to read a lot in the newspaper, and he just stopped being able to do those things. And so that those cues, that my dad liked to listen to the radio, to talk radio. I'd hear him in the other room talking to the radio half the day. When he stopped doing those things, I kind of knew, all right, we're progressing a little bit, and went ahead and moved down there. And we were, I mean, we were getting closer. He and I, and my sister and I were not. Um, my sister was then she would stay later after work or meet friends after work so that she could avoid it, because my sister couldn't deal with the fact that my dad was starting to go downhill while I was having to ramp up and take care of him because he was. And then I had my sister that I'm trying to take care of because she has issues that she already was dealing with from coming from a divorce, and things that were going on with her son. And then when her son came down, then I was trying to help take care of my 4-year-old nephew. There were a lot of a lot of variables, a lot of balls to jump. Because my dad was a hoarder, he had not paid his taxes in 8 years. Actually, he hadn't filed taxes in 8 years. So I had to gather all that information and get that done. My dad had not created a will. My dad had not created a power of attorney or a healthcare power of attorney. And in early September, after the tumors had started popping up, he knew that we needed to go ahead and move on that because he might get to a point where he couldn't make those decisions for himself. And he knew that without being a spouse, he knew and trusted me to make those decisions for him. And my sister, for that matter, too. She did agree with that. She
So
always
when you moved in there
Mhm.
and things started progressing for the worse, what were you feeling as far as your relationship with him? And, you mentioned that, there was forgiveness involved and things like that. Talk a little bit about that.
Um, I'd have to say it really came down to being able to talk about my sister and us being able to confront the issues that we hadn't. Um, he wasn't that superficial dad anymore. And my dad could talk about my dad was a super intelligent genius and knew you could ask him a question about anything and he could answer it. And so we could talk all day long about stuff that didn't relate to our feelings, to our connection toward one another, our relationship. But the second you started to talk about that, he shut down. He didn't want to. And I don't know if my dad just felt like he knew he needed to confront that he didn't have time. But us being able to have that one-on-one, because my sister wasn't there during the day, I was working on the house. And so my dad would kind of come in and be like, hey, you missed a spot up there, or you need to cut in the floor a little, tighter, or what. He always had some little thing that he was trying to give me. And we kind of just it fell right back into place where I felt like that relationship that I had with him as a kid was just there again. I just there was no hollowness anymore to us. He was my daddy again, and I started calling him daddy again instead of dad. Um, and that was probably my biggest thing, because coming in factual, coming in sciencey, and the nurse part of me, because I had been in nursing school, and that's what I'd always wanted to do. I've always taken care of people. My mother's had several surgeries, my children, I kind of always am the helping hand. And this was different because this isn't the friend that needs assist. And it was broken. That was the other part of it. That was a broken relationship that I'm taking care of someone with. And you can't be broken but for so long if you're together with that amount of time. And going through, every 2 weeks going to the VA and looking at his numbers and seeing that things are getting worse, seeing the progression on his scans. And my dad wouldn't talk about death. My dad was 63 and turned that summer. He turned on August 19th, he had turned 64. And I think our last trip, he'd gone up there and his test had come back. We thought it actually may have progressed into his brain. And he had already decided that if it had moved that far, he was done. He wasn't doing any more treatment. And I agreed with him. I didn't want him to. My dad, being as gifted and as smart as he was, I knew that was going to probably knock him down if it was there. And instead, my dad honestly carried on every day like it was another day. What are we doing today? Are we tackling the kitchen? Are we handling the bathroom? Are we retiling? Are we grouting? What are we doing? Always recalculating like a GPS, but never, I'm dying. Never. Even when the tumors pop out in his neck, not dying. And that changed probably about the last weekend of September. We had come up, like I said, for a visit to the VA to see his doctor, and we gotten those test results, but his white blood count was really high, and she wanted to do a bone strengthening treatment and then switch up his immunotherapy. And we asked, how much time? And she was like, you've got weeks to 2 months if you stop, or if we keep taking what we're taking.
Can I
But
pause you right there? Can
Mhm.
you share the story of your experience at Cabela's?
Yeah, no, well, see, that's right after this doctor's appointment, and I'm going
Okay.
there. So the
Okay.
doctor's appointment, she kind of comes in and says, you need to do the bone strengthening treatment so we can switch up your immunotherapy, because melanoma is one of the two most aggressive cancers. The cells themselves mutate so often that every time, whatever treatment cycle you're doing, it mutates and you have to switch gears because the spike protein, whatever it is that it was attacking, the cancer has now outsmarted you. And so you need to come up with plan B, plan C. So we were about to hit plan B. And she wanted to do 2 bone strengthening treatments 2 weeks apart, and then we were going to start that treatment. And so we leave the VA, and my dad, when we went to these visits, we would stay locally where I live, which was about an hour from Durham. And my mother lives about 2 hours from there, and her house has a side apartment that was handicap accessible. That when my father came up for those VA visits, he would stay there, and then I would pick him up and drop him off. And because he was getting more tired, and because he had that bone treatment, we were staying the night. We were going to stay Thursday night and drive back on Friday, take him back home. And I was checking in with my kids and checking in on, things that I needed to handle at my house. And my mother kind of checked in on him a lot because he was not feeling well. And so anyway, on the way home, my dad's like, I'm like, is there something you need, while we're out and about before we go to the house? And my dad's like, I need socks. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, there's a Cabela's right off of, and it was brand new in the local shopping area that I go to. So we decided we'd stop at Cabela's and get him some socks. And we walk in the door because it's a new store opening. They have people up front who are taking applications for credit cards for the store. And so the guy approaches my dad and he's like, hey, would you like to fill out a card today? You can get 50, if you fill it out now and you're approved, you get $50 off at the cash register on your first purchase, all this other stuff. And my dad's like, I don't have time. And he says again, well, hold on, sir. What I mean is it doesn't take but 2 minutes to fill this out. And my dad, because of having that large patch removed from his head, once it healed, the bolster cap that they had placed over the top of it, it was just bald skin. And so since he had that spot, my dad wore a cap always on the top of his head. And he wore a button-up short-sleeve collared shirt so that it would hide a lot of the tumors on his neck. So when the guy says that to him the second time, my dad kind of pulls back the collar of his shirt and then lifts his hat so that he can see everything. And my dad says, I don't have time. And that was probably really the first time that my dad acknowledged he knew he was close. And I'm tearing up. The guy who's trying to get him to fill out a credit card application, and he's tearing up and he does not know what to say. He's like, sir, what do you need? He's like, I need ankle socks. And he's like, go back here to the back, turn to the right. You'll find them. They're right there on the left-hand side against the back wall. If you don't, my name's Larry. Come back and find me. I'll take you there. And so we go get his socks. We come home. And when we got him home within that next week, my dad's pain ramped every day. And we went up in the ER to get morphine and honestly to relieve his constipation, because he was in so much agony with that as well, because now that was pressing on his liver. And those last scans that he got had shown that he had multiple tumors in his liver as well as on his liver now. It had spread throughout his entire pelvis. It was beginning to spread up his spine. The rest of the rib cage from like where 5 and 9 had been filled in now went all the way up to his neck. And so still everything except for his brain pretty much wound up being infected. My dad had what looked like spider webs of black on his chest. And it honestly, the tumors were black. To me, it was like the melanoma was just moving from his core outward to skin level. And the darker black it got, the worse my dad got. And we never went back. And he was having to take a lot of medication, and he started stumbling. And my dad had gotten to a point where he's barely 64. my dad could run circles around normal people. In fact, in the hospital after his surgery, when they want you to walk 3 laps, he did 32 the first day and 37 the next day. And he's like leaving my sister and I. We're almost at a jog pace to keep up with him because and he only took a Tylenol. So for him to say, I'm in pain, meant he was in excruciating pain. And that became very hard to manage. And because he was stumbling, I had to make the call like a week. It was the second week in October on that Monday, and call his oncologist and say, he can't make it. Like, we can't get back to you. What should we do? And she's like, Amber, I think it's time that we call hospice. And my dad did not want to talk about hospice earlier, 3 weeks before. We had tried to talk about it during his last VA appointment, and he did not want to talk about hospice yet. My dad was very independent, and he honestly, he was a naturopath. So to be taking all these immunotherapies, he was still taking his vitamins, but he's taken all these pharmaceuticals that he really wasn't necessarily 100% comfortable taking them. But being we had gone that 12-week window before we ever started immunotherapy, and all those tumors bubbled up as quickly as they did, I think he was aware that that was the only thing slowing it down. So I had to go into the room because my dad had gotten to where pretty much he needed to stay in the bed. And that was the other point, because he's 64 and he's so active, his body was giving out. His body was tiring out. And his brain wasn't, so he did not want to sit still. And so I had to sit him down and say, it's time to call hospice. And he was just like, is that what the doctor wants? And I was like, yeah, Dad, like, we can't get you in the car. You can't even stand without being assisted.
So up to this point, can you share what you were doing for him as a caregiver?
Well, that was everything. By that point, it was everything. That when we moved that day when I called, I had come home for a couple of days. There were some things I needed to get straight with my kids, and my sister had him for 2 nights by herself. And she calls me in a panic because my dad really was starting to, I don't know if it was his pain. I'm not exactly sure what was going on with his brain process, but he couldn't sleep. He was very, I wouldn't say agitated, but anxious. And he paced and paced and paced. And we had a medication schedule because he was on so many medications. We had a medication schedule that we checked off, like we wrote in what time he got it, if it was late, if it was early, like everything was always adjusted correctly so that he got what he needed when he needed it. We were very, very, very stringent on that schedule, mainly because if you get away from your pain meds, that pain gets ahead of you. It takes 2 or 3 doses before you can get it managed again. And honestly, after we'd been to the ER for the morphine the week before, I didn't want us to get there. So I had to sit him down and say, Dad, we've got to call in hospice. And so they brought him in. And even though my dad's medicated, they pretty much gave him Ativan and Haldol to calm him down. So his anxiety, that fidgetiness, the jitteriness, all of it, he could just lay in the bed, which did in ways give him more energy. But on that Sunday, the day before, my dad had like 4 bites of watermelon. He really was not interested in food. And that was the first time he had started to back off a tiny bit on food, like on Friday and Saturday. And then Sunday was homecoming in our local church. And his brother and sister had come with a ton of food so that my sister and I could eat, so that Dad had food. And a lot of people at the church knew that Daddy was really sick. And so they had sent those things as well at the end of the day so that we would have that. We had a lot of people who came in and brought us meals and so forth. That was really, really helpful. Especially when you're trying to balance everything else that's going on. And I kind of describe my dad like he was ADD. I'm ADD. We don't stop. We're kind of Energizer bunnies, including in our heads, our minds. So That was on Monday. They got him in the bed. They got him on the medications, and he finally calmed down. And my dad, they had a bedside toilet for him to use if he wanted to use it, but because he had stopped eating, my dad never went to the bathroom again for that. To pee, he did. And uh, that was one thing I was not going to take from him. He still wanted to stand up and go, but his medication was so high that it was danger for him to walk. Like he had fallen several, like probably 4 times within the 24 hours before they put him on hospice care, and hit the bathroom tile floor, and like even like hit where his original scar tissue was at, and like cut a mark in it, and we didn't need another infection. So my Uncle Ricky and I did it at first. We lift my dad up and just kind of stand, and I would hold the urinal, let him go, and then cover him and put him back in bed. And that worked. Oh, actually, and really, honestly, it was one-handed. Like I could do it very easily by myself at first. That first day or two, he was really wobbly because of the medication, but he still had his strength. But on Monday and Tuesday, he was pretty quiet too. He would give you very 1 or 2 word answers. I could tell his pain was high. And my dad was very good about being able to calm himself down, keeping his blood pressure, keeping his heart rate regulated, his breathing regulated, and not speaking. I think was honestly him kind of doing his own meditation, trying to keep his pain levels, trying to keep himself relaxed. And on Wednesday, he woke up with a lot of energy. And so my uncle had stopped by, and they weren't close. His immediately younger brother, my dad had 2 brothers and a sister. Well, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. And this brother was his the next one down. And they didn't necessarily get along, but my uncle had come over, and he was going out of town for a week. And I was like, Dad's got a lot of energy today. You really should go in there and see him. And he did. And by that point on Wednesday, my dad was really beginning to struggle to swallow. And it took a group effort. And when I say a group effort, I mean, I had taken his medications and worked them down in water, like his nurses had shown me. And I'm using a syringe to kind of put it in the back of his throat. But his youngest brother, and his sister on one side of him. His other sister is holding his head so he can tilt it back. And my uncle is the one, kind of holding like, you can do it, Dana, you can do it. And when he was done, he was like, you make me so proud. And my dad was like, I love you. And I wouldn't say that they said that a whole heck of a lot. My aunts, yes, all the time. But the men, not so much. You knew it. Like you could see them together at reunions and stuff. And the 5 of them, they were very close. But for him to say that to my Uncle Ben to be able to say that to him, because he was so medicated, I was very worried whether or not my dad kind of grasped that. But because he was so alert mentally that day, I knew that he did. So that evening, we wound up calling in and getting a morphine pump. And so once we went on the morphine pump, and honestly, Dad completely lost the ability to swallow, which is why we went to the morphine pump, because we couldn't give his medication anymore. He no longer spoke. And it was pretty much
Amber, let me
postpartum.
hold you there.
Yep.
I'd like to know this.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to kind of wrap up the interview, but
Yep.
what I'd like to know is, what did you learn from this experience, and what would you want to share with people to let them know, what you learned throughout this experience with your dad?
Every minute, every day counts. Your relationships count. That my sister got worse and worse as that process went on, as my dad and I got closer and closer. And part of that was her not being able to, she couldn't deal with, they're very much alike, and she couldn't deal with that grief. She didn't want to own that our daddy was dying. She didn't want to watch it. It was ripping her heart out. And I understood that, but she would get angry with my dad. And I would tell her, look, on his best day, when he's running circles out here with us, when he's still playing with, his grandson in the yard, kicking the soccer ball around, like while he's still able to go out in the garden and do those things, he's still dying. Like, we knew the level of melanoma that he had, as aggressive as it was. And my dad's metabolism was fast. And I feel like that cancer kind of used that to an advantage. And that was why my dad went downhill and just went so quickly. My dad lived a total of 5 months, 5.5 months from diagnosis until his death. And that just taught me that anything that I had against my dad, like, we did work our feelings out. We did forgive each other. Any anger that was there was gone. Any shame, any guilt, any of it, we purged it all. Fix your relationships. And my sister didn't.
Beautiful.
My sister,
that is beautiful.
My sister didn't. And my thing was, I knew I wanted that for him, but I wanted that for me. Like, that's my dad. I don't want him to die taking any regrets. I didn't want him to die thinking that I wasn't one of his 2 daughters. And for a long time, I didn't feel like his daughter. I kind of felt like an outsider. And with that, no. And that was the other part of it. Even if I was angry, even if I was, anger, pretty much just anger. If I'm angry at him for anything, my lesson to my sister that I kept trying to express was, it could wait. I've got the rest of my life. I can deal with my anger. I can deal with that. That's my anger. That's not his anger. That's my anger. But that wasn't between us. That wasn't something that I needed to fix. And honestly, I felt like that was, my sister has not been able, dealing with his death has been, I feel like it was, don't get me wrong, it was devastating. I was 37, but I don't regret it. I regret that I don't have more time with him. That's what I regret. I wish he was still here. I wish I could pick his brain about everything. I wish I could share with him about what's going on with his grandkids' lives now, what's going on with my life, that I did go back to school, that I finished it because I had dropped out of nursing school to take care of him, and he was not happy with me for that. So I would like to see him, or I would love for him to be able to see those things now for me. But I kind of feel like my dad is always kind of checking in on me. And I feel like where he's at now, he knows. He knows how I feel. He knows about my successes. He knows about my heartaches. He knows about my children. He knows about my sister. And that would be my biggest, that's one of the biggest ones, is focusing on fixing those relationships. Like, if you're a caregiver or you're just a family member with this person that is sick. And for myself, I had cervical cancer. So I'm 9 years in remission, and hopefully that's stage 2, and hopefully that will never come back. But you have to fix your soul. Like, if you're going to take it somewhere else, why take it heavy? Why take it burdened? And my father had not been as close to the church for the last decade or 2 before the end of his life. And I knew that by me being able to sit down with him and discuss those things about relationships, and not just ours, about with my sister, with his ex-wives, with his parents that had passed, and the grief that he had over them, being able to talk about all that, I felt like I was unpacking all those mental boxes that kind of paired up with the boxes that were around the house, where every single thing that had been compartmentalized or hoarded, there was another matching in his brain for that. And I kind of feel like we unpacked that. I
That
opened
is
the door for him to be able to purge that so that he could leave this world lighter, brighter. My dad, I would not say he was funny. He had a very dry humor. He was funny, but my daddy wasn't happy. And my daddy hadn't been happy, or what I would call mentally whole for a really long time. And when he left, he may have been in pain, but my dad was mentally whole. He was in his soul, he was at rest. He had fixed the wrongs that he felt he had done, the wrongs to the people that he thought he had hurt. He had fixed them all.
that
And
is
that I think was like my ultimate. I couldn't. I of course I cried at certain memories and so forth in this memorial service, but I don't have any regrets. Tom is my only regret, and I spent every second, and I did from the moment I found out. I jumped in his care, and I was in the driver's seat, like I took over, and because I needed, not only I needed to take care of him, maybe I did. I may have needed to take care of him to repay him for the fact that I felt like I hadn't been there in those teenage years. And I couldn't heal the pain from my parents' marriage breaking up. But I do own that me walking away didn't help him anymore. It only hurt him worse and made him shut down more. So I'm glad that I was able to fix that or help
that is
him.
that is so awesome, Amber. That is, but it brings me to a point, and we're gonna have to close out this interview. Thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
sharing your spirit and your soul and your father's story. It was fantastic. But it takes me to, life is short. Life
Yep.
is short. I've stared my own mortality right in the face.
Yep.
I've come to realize that we need to repair our relationships,
Yep.
and you can't wait, and
No.
it's so important. Now, one of the greatest experiences that I've had in my life is when my daughter Lisa came and stayed with me and helped me for 2.5 months. And I've told her this. It was just one of the greatest experiences and one of the greatest things that anyone has ever done for me.
Yep.
And I know he felt the same way about what you
Yeah,
did for
and
him.
I think when we originally talked, that I got that too, that we kind of had shared opposite sides of that relationship.
Right.
That you kind of
Right.
have my dad's side, and your daughter has my side.
Right.
So I do identify very much. I think I'm pretty close to your daughter's age at that time, like the whole nine yards. And yeah, I mean that is whether it's relationship with your kids, your spouse, your friends, whoever it is. I mean, my dad had friends that he hadn't seen in 20, 25 years. Just life took them in different directions. But these people at one point in time meant something to him. So I had reached out to them and said, look, my dad is sick. Um, there's not going to be a big window of time for you to be able to come down if you want to visit and actually be able to visit and have my dad present. And they did. They came down. They both did. And he wasn't expecting either one of them. One of them he hadn't seen in I think 33 years. The other one it was a good 25. So that was also something that I kind of gave him as a gift.
Beautiful.
But again, it was him healing those relationships, different parts of himself that I felt like he had broken off or had been broken. And that when one door closed, my dad just walked and didn't look back and didn't face it, didn't deal with it. And maybe he just didn't mentally have the wherewithal to do that. I don't really know whether that was part of, and that very much could have been part of his neurodivergence, was that being able to process those things and attach to the emotions to it is something I have a difficult time with as well. And so I can see where he struggled with that, and maybe that's why I was able to finally bridge that gap with him, was because I had been diagnosed by that point. I had figured out, oh, this is why I do this. This is why everything is buzzing all the time and it's hard to keep the pieces together. And that very well may have been what was going on with my dad. So I kind of just used myself as I think, a guide, just to help him be able to mentally clear his memory banks, just get rid of the junk and leave what was positive there, because he wasn't. And so even though he was very positive, he still had all this stuff cluttering and clogging up this stuff up here. And I was like, we got to get rid of that too if you're going to heal yourself, even if you're going to make it to the other side. And you have to heal yourself, you have to put in the work. And he kind of had avoided that, so that was our time that we had to, we got to crunch, 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 crunch. And yeah, I'm glad that I was able to get him to make himself whole.
Thank you so much, Amber.
Welcome.
I think that's such an important lesson for everybody. And so thank you for
You're
sharing
welcome.
this
You're
incredible
welcome.
story. Really, really great. And everyone out there, life is short. Don't waste it. Don't, every day is important in your life. And I try to utilize every bit of time that I have, because nobody is given tomorrow.
No.
We don't know whether we're going to have later on today. You just don't know. And so don't take anything for granted. Make the most out of every single day, every single hour, every single minute, and you'll live a much happier life. Absolutely.
Every single person. I mean, whether it's the guy on your neighbor that you cross across the street and you smile or wave hello, like, those relationships matter. That's what keeps us all boosted. It keeps us connected. And I think it's much harder to give up on yourself. It's much harder to give up on anything if you feel supported. So I do like that's how I approach life myself, is just there's no strangers.
That's a great way to live. Thank you so much, Amber.
You're welcome.
And thank you for everybody joining us here on To Be Your Own Hero. Please subscribe, like, and make a comment in the comments section. And we will see you next week on To Be Your Own Hero. Thank you once again.